Exactly. It's what you got to do every time. Hey, okay,
Oh, I
cool.
see it.
We're officially live.
It's
So
yellow.
small technical difficulties. It's the small triumphs. Okay, well, officially welcome to everybody, especially Saron. Thank you so much for coming here again, especially on East Coast hours. It's
No
definitely a
problem.
little bit later out there. Thank you to all the students who are here, and I just want to say thanks, and Dan as well for putting this together. I guess we can probably just dive right in. I think you probably have a pretty good idea of who we are and what we do. We teach code. We teach professional web development. And you are a professional web developer, so we're pretty curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I can start all the way from the sort of beginning. So when I was in college, I took a biology course that really, really excited me. I never saw myself as a sciencey, techie type of person. I always thought I was a more creative person. If you saw my cartoon, you probably got a sense of that. And I took my bio course and I loved it, and I said, holy crap, I need to be a doctor. And so I did the pre-med track. I was, I think, 2 courses short of a bio degree, ended up getting a double degree in English and psychology. I taught organic chemistry. I was a biochemistry research fellow. I was a 3rd author published. Like, I went hard. Like, I was all in. And then near the end of my junior year, I decided to actually shadow a doctor, which I should have done much sooner. And I realized that all of the researchy, decomposition and problem-solving stuff that I loved from being a science student was very different from kind of the day-to-day of being a doctor. And so I said, okay, I don't think the day-to-day is really for me. And so I decided to pursue my other love, which is journalism. And so when I did that, I graduated, and I'd always done journalism throughout my undergrad career, and so I ended up working at NPR for a short bit. I moved up here, so now I'm in the New York area, so I moved up here to work at Discover Magazine, and in that process, I read the Steve Jobs book. I don't know if you've all read the Steve Jobs book, but that book literally changed my life.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs is kind of a jerk, but he was the first person that I heard about, that I read about, who brought together the hard, sciencey, analytic stuff that I always associated with tech, with the creative, fun communication stuff that I always saw myself in. And so before that book, I really felt like I had to pick a side. I had to pick between storytelling and being creative, and from like problem solving and being really analytical. And tech seemed like a way to bring all of that together. So that was really exciting me. That's kind of how, that's what piqued my interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I read that book, I said, okay, I need to get into this tech world, this startup world. How do I do that? I'm not technical. I don't have any technical skills. And so I talked my way into a couple different jobs doing everything that wasn't product. So I've done some marketing stuff, some sales stuff, some BD, some program management, all that stuff, but not actually like product. And so that was annoying to me. Like, I felt like I was always looking over the shoulder of real developers and engineers and product people, and I felt like they were the ones who had the real power. They were the ones who were making interesting things, and I couldn't make interesting things. I could talk about making interesting things, but I couldn't make it. And so to me, the final straw was the last startup that I worked at. We had to build. It was a boot camp, actually. It was a 5-week boot camp, but for startup and entrepreneurship. And so we had to create this social online platform because we wanted to have an online component to it. And I ended up kind of PMing the product with an outside dev shop who did a terrible job, just a terrible job. And I was so frustrated because the whole time I was thinking, if I just knew how to code, if I knew, it wouldn't everything was going. So I learned to code on my own for a couple months. So I did Code Academy, Code School, Treehouse, a lot of the resources that I'm sure you've heard of and you've probably used. And to me, it was a very lonely experience. It was, me in my apartment, just 12, 16 hours a day, struggling through and feeling very dumb a lot of the time, most of the time. But every time that it worked, it just totally, erased the frustration that I felt right before it. And so it just kind of kept me going. And then after a few months of that, I applied and got accepted to the Flatiron School and did that for 3 months. The Flatiron School, in case you don't know, is an in-person boot camp in New York City. It's a 3-month program, full-time, learning primarily Ruby on Rails, a little bit of JavaScript. Wish we did more JavaScript, but mostly Ruby on Rails shop. When I graduated, we had a career fair, or yeah, they called it, I think, a science fair, but really it was a career fair, where all the students had to, sit and show off their apps and whatever it is that they built. And I'm pretty sure I was the only person who had only one thing to show. I think everyone else had like 3 or 4 apps that they built. But the difference was that I knew how to talk about my app, and I knew how to talk about my learning in the way that a lot of my peers didn't know how to do. And that fair went really, really well for me. And I think that night I'd already booked an interview. By the end of the week, I had, I think, 6 to 7 interviews booked. And I ended up working as a hacker in residence for a nonprofit in New York called the New York Tech Meetup. And I did that for 7 months, building out their platform. That process, that first job for me, was so painful. It was so painful. And it was one of those jobs where I said, where it was myself and one other developer, and we both graduated. We were both kind of chosen by the school to be these hackers in residence. And I thought we were going to have like a CTO or a senior developer or somebody who knew what they were doing, and we didn't, and we had to learn everything the hard way. We did everything wrong 10 different times in 10 different ways before we ever did it right. And knowing what I knew now, I learned a lot, but I think I could have learned it so much faster and so much, with so much less pain if I had some kind of senior developer, CTO, mentor in that first job. So when you get to that point, I think that's something I tell a lot of people who are new to code, is that first job, I think, is so important. It's so important. I think that sets the stage for everything else in terms of your salary and your experience and what you're going to learn. And I think that having people on the team who are invested in you and your growth is really, really important. It's one thing that I really wish I had in that first job. Do you want me to keep going, or does anyone have any? I feel like I've given like a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah. I guess so. My first question would be: you mentioned how painful that transition was, and that you had to learn all kinds of new stuff. So how would you describe the difference between the environment at the boot camp, and then what that looks like when you immediately the next day, what that binary transition is between boot camp world and like job world? What does that look like, and why was it so hard?
That's a great question. And you know what the funny thing is? I've told this story so many times. I think you're the first person to ask that question. So shame on everyone else, and good for you. It's nothing like it. Like, it's nothing like it. And that to me was the biggest shocker. It's like you graduate from a boot camp and you're so excited about everything you know, and you think, oh my god, I can like make stuff. I can like, look, mom, I made a form, and you're really excited about it. And then you enter the real world, and there's so much more to being a developer than just coding, because there's like knowing Git flow, right? Like when you're coding in a boot camp, you're not really on a collaborative team, for example. You're not like building, there's not like 10 people building, I don't know how it is with you guys, but for us, it wasn't like 10 people building one product. It was kind of you working on labs, you turning in assessments. It was you doing your own thing. So you don't really learn about code reviews. You don't really learn about like making pull requests and commenting. You don't really learn about like rebase workflow. Like there's so many just simple collaboration things that you just don't know. Beyond that, you don't know about product management, right? Like and this is also dependent on what you end up doing, but in our hacker in residence role, we were managing ourselves. So we had to use, I think we used Pivotal Tracker, and if you're all familiar with that tool, but
we use that as part of the curriculum.
Awesome. Yeah, so we use that. So even organizing like what goes in the backlog, what goes in the next, like what goes in these categories, how long do you, oh my god, estimating how long things take is the worst. I'm getting better, but it's so hard. And no one really teaches you how to estimate it, and it's really hard to estimate it if you're doing something for the second time. So there's such a learning curve that's not about what is a method or what is a function, and being a developer is a lot more than that. I mean, the biggest one is just communication. Like when do you ask questions? When do you let yourself, kind of struggle for a bit? When do you move on? When do you try different solutions? How do you try things? How do you know when the tool has failed you versus kind of you just need someone who knows the tool? Like there's so many, and that to me is the biggest thing, like those decision points. And it's really hard to make good decisions as a new developer because you don't have the experience to base it on.
Right.
Sorry, was that sad? I feel like that was a little sad.
No, that's great. I mean, I feel like it's sort of embracing the idea that being a developer, there is no end. There's no you're done and you're good to go and now you can coast. It's this it's this constant scramble to like keep learning and keep struggling, and that the process of learning itself is really kind of your value as a human, as a developer, more than the actual skills you know. Aside from obviously good foundations, but
yeah, definitely.
Does anyone have any questions? And by the way, if you're viewing, there's a little Q&A app which I just opened up, so feel free to ask your questions there or in the Slack chat, and I'll pick them up. But anyone here, did you guys have any questions that we could hop onto?
I guess my first question would be like, how do you know that you're like ready? You know what I mean?
Ready for a job or ready for what?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll ever feel ready, to be very honest with you. And I think that if you wait I don't think that you will ever feel ready for most things that are worth doing. And I think that if you wait until you feel ready, you're just never going to do it. And you're going to wait way longer than you should. So I think that you should go after the things that you want, even if you're not ready for it. Like, I fundamentally believe that. So I spoke at RailsConf last year. When I spoke at RailsConf, which is like the biggest, the biggest RailsConf, I had been coding professionally for a month. And I was on stage talking to like hundreds of people about coding. What the hell? Like, that doesn't even make any sense. And I was nauseous, and I was like totally freaking out. I think I threw up before. Like, it was awful, and I felt totally not ready. But I did it, and that one thing opened up doors in terms of speaking, in terms of career, in terms of just so many different ways. And that, to me personally, was a really big lesson in just, if you want it and you think it'll help you, just go for it. And don't say no to yourself. Let people say no to you. If a company says or feels that you're not ready, they'll tell you because you won't get the job, and it's that simple. But I think it's important to let other people deny you and not to say no to you.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Anybody else?
You said, part of being a developer is constantly growing and learning, and it's not really like a goal as much as it's a continuous process. Yeah. How do you keep yourself? Is it easy to sort of get comfortable and end up just falling into a rut where you don't really grow as a developer? Do you have to sort of actively try to find new things to learn, or are you just constantly finding new things to learn day to day?
So it totally depends. I think that's where it's really important to pick a good place. I think that if you work at like a dev shop or a consultancy, most likely you're working on new projects depending on the shop, every, couple months, maybe every 6 months. And in that way, you get to at least work at different domains, if not potentially different languages, and kind of solving different problems. So I think that's a really great way to be in a constant state of learning. But there are there are plenty of jobs as developers where you're basically doing one thing and you're kind of doing it over and over and over again. And you get really good at that one thing so you can feel great, but you're not growing, you're not challenging yourself. And I don't think you're necessarily helping your career in terms of, getting the next job if you decide to leave. So I think that it's definitely dependent on where you work and the type of work that you do. But I think that there's also so many other ways to grow outside of work. So many, I do the CodeNewbie community, which is how I know Dan. And so many of our members are not coders full-time. They're trying to be coders full-time. And nights and weekends is where they do open source work. Dan runs our JavaScript Tuesdays group, and they're doing like a team project. And I think there's just so many different ways to push yourself that are outside of work that between the two of them, and assuming you have the time and you're able to do that, I think there are lots of ways to keep growing even if your job doesn't allow for it. Hackathons are also another great place, right? Because hackathons are 1 day, 2 day, fully super intensive. Let's do this one thing and then you're done. So you can, if you don't like that technology, that language, you're done. You can walk away and not feel bad about it. So there's lots of ways to keep growing. All right, what else you got?
Can you run down a day at Thoughtbot?
A day at Thoughtbot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yep.
Sure. So you start in the morning, get there about 10 o'clock, do stand-up for about 10, 15 minutes. After you do stand-up, your time is basically your own. You usually end up doing stand-up with the client that you're working on, and that stand-up is like another 10, 15 minutes, and then you're just coding. Everyone takes lunch at 12. Lunch is roughly like 45 minutes to an hour, and everyone generally stops at 12 o'clock. And then you keep coding throughout the rest of the day until 6, and then 6 everyone leaves. So there's like a really good work-life balance there. Fridays are investment days, so the goal is to work on something either for the community, for yourself as a developer, like in terms of you're pushing yourself and your knowledge and your growth, or helping the company in some way. So that's a great day to work on the education product, which is Upcase. Like I want to say a different name, but Upcase. And once a week, there's also a retro with the client, and that's about an hour, hour and a half. But other than that, most of the time is your own, and you kind of do whatever you need to do to get the coding done. People always ask about the pairing culture, so I'll speak to that. There isn't a lot of it, to be very honest. People pair generally if they need to. So it's funny, when I first started to code, I really, really liked pairing all the time because I felt like I got stuck very, very often. And so it's just easier, one, you're less frustrated when you can kind of spread the frustration among two people than taking it all on your own. So I felt like it was more enjoyable and less frustrating and just better to do it with someone else. But as I've gotten more comfortable, I pair a lot less. And so generally they pair if they're stuck or if there's a new concept, but most people just work on their own. So Joseph asked, when looking for a first job, what kinds of things are important to look at? You mentioned the presence of a senior developer, but can you elaborate? Yes, I can totally elaborate. So different places do different things. Not a lot. Some places will give you an actual mentor. I think this is more likely to happen if you're in a junior developer role where like you're a junior and you're expected to level up. So there's a place that has a formal mentoring program. That's awesome. If there isn't, then having a place where, a place that has investment time is great because that's the company saying everyone should take a whole day or 20% of their time to just focus on themselves. And I think that's a huge thing to look for. Other places do things like lunch and learns, and they'll do a tech talk, over food and bring food in and dive into some new language. I think that's really great as well. But in general, I would ask, so when you're doing the interview with a company, I would ask, what kinds of things do you do to help your developers get better? What kinds of things do you do to promote growth? How do you promote learning? How do you invest in your developers? Those are the kinds of questions that I would ask and see what answers they have. So I think there's many different ways to support developers, but and I think some companies are also uncomfortable with the whole. They don't want the obligation of we're going to mentor you. But I think that knowing that you have some kind of a support system, I think is really good. Also, I think that if you're able, so I Google the crap out of everyone I meet. So you should totally do that for all the employees if you can on the team that you might be on, and you can see the kinds of activities that people do. So if the people on your team also volunteer at Railsbridge, also speak at conferences, they also go to mentor at different hackathons. Those are the people that are very invested in helping other people learn, which means they're probably going to be invested in you learning. So I think that looking at all those kind of clues and getting all that information is super helpful. Does that answer your question, Joseph? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
Sure. I have a question about the job hunt. I really love that you had a strategy for yourself that really played to your strengths. But when you look around the rest of your cohort, or maybe at future cohorts, if you keep in touch, what are some different strategies that were also successful? Like friends and contacts you have there who were successful but in a different way. What did they do?
Oh, that's a really good question. I didn't ask people about their strategies, so I don't know what their strategies were. I can say that, and so that's hard because there's so much. there's a lot of, I guess, privilege that goes into a job hunt, right? So for one person who comes to mind, she could afford to go 6 months without finding a job. And it's not that she couldn't find a job, it's that she could go 6 months. So she was very happy to take her time, do one interview at a time, work on her skills the other time, and eventually, and now she's at Code Academy, and eventually when she found the exact perfect fit, she took it, right? So her strategy was very different from, I think, most of ours, because she could do that. She could just not work for an additional 6 months besides the 3 months she already took off. So if you're in that boat, that's definitely a strategy. Other people, again, going back to like, being able to afford to do these things, other people, including myself actually, as a hacker in residence, I didn't get paid very much, but a lot of people have taken internships and apprenticeships. I personally, if you can afford to do that, I definitely think that's a great way to go. I think it's such a great way to go, because when you are an intern, an apprentice, you are actually getting paid to learn. Like, your whole point of being there is to learn. And I think that, like I said, there's such a learning curve between I'm in a boot camp and I'm at the job, and having that opportunity to know what you're getting into and kind of, just focus on learning in the real world and then getting that high-paying salary, to me, is the best strategy if you're able to do that. Unfortunately, there's just very limited internships and apprenticeships from what I've seen and what I've heard for people, at least for people who are not like computer science undergraduates who are getting like a summer internship. So that's the part that's a little bit of a bummer. But that to me is a really good one too. And a lot of those, well, not a lot, but I think a handful of those have turned into high-paying promotions and jobs at the same company. So that has definitely worked out for a couple people. And I think beyond that, I know that people, to me, the biggest strategy has been people not waiting to get a job, to have a job handed to them. That, to me, is the best strategy. I know someone who cold emailed the crap out of everybody. Just Googled she cold emailed the CEO of what is that thing called, Zipcar. She cold emailed the CEO of like all these companies, all these startups, got the interviews, got there, pitched herself, sold herself, and then she got the position, And so I think that is the ultimate strategy. It's not waiting for Eric. I don't know how your job placement thing works, but not waiting on Eric to get you a job, but it's to go out there and put yourself out there, make a name for yourself as much as you can in this community, and to not be afraid to reach out to people you don't know. That's the ultimate strategy.
Nothing replaces tenacity. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And you need a shirt with that on it. I like that.
Yeah, we talk a lot about hustle and how important it is.
So important.
And it's kind of, on one end you have your skills, but on the other end you have to get those skills to the people who want to interview you. And
right.
I think that's one of the biggest gaps, because we do focus quite a bit on talking about interviewing, particularly later in the course, and building up skills to sort of handle the technical interviews and show yourself off. But that gap between 0 interviews and interviews is actually very large for people in a junior position, right? Because there are a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
So actually, one of my questions was sort of related to what Dan was asking. Was really, how did you cross that gap? You could cold email everyone out there, but you mentioned that you picked up a number of interviews very quickly. So like for you to leverage your strengths, like how did that work personally from your own narrative?
Yeah. So I think I did 2 things that I encourage other people to do. The first is I was very loud about what I was learning before I knew anything. So when I was, I remember actually when I was going through the Learn SQL the Hard Way book by Zed Shaw, I just kept tweeting things from the book. I wasn't even tweeting like my opinions of the book. I was just tweeting the book. Like, I was so excited about what I read, I would pull out a quote and I'd say, quote, and I'd, mention him. And eventually he saw that and he reached out to me and he was like, oh, I see you're reading the book. What do you think? And I was like, oh, it's great. And we started going back and forth. And I shared the cartoon with him. And then he emailed me and he said, oh, if you ever need any help, you let me know. And when he came to visit New York, like last year, I think it was, like we ended up getting lunch. And now we're friends, and he's been on the podcast. And like now I'm friends with Zed Shaw, just because I tweeted. Like it's crazy how little you can do and how far it can take you. And so I think that I've just consistently been very, very vocal about my learning, even when I didn't know very much. And I think that the louder you are about what you're doing, people will notice. Like people see. They may not tell you they're watching, but they're watching you. in a good way, not in a creepy way. But so, and people started following me who were also interested in code, and all these very, very early connections from, when I first started learning to code just in my apartment developed and grew over time, so that when I was finally job ready, I already had these people. They were already in my corner. I wasn't starting from nothing when I needed a job. I had people. I've invested this time into building a network that I could leverage a year later. So that is like the biggest thing. Like, it's never too early to get your name out. It's never too early to start networking in a genuine way. Like, genuinely be interested in other people's lives. That's the first one. The second thing is, I know how I am different than other people, specifically in my cohort. And I knew that, at the science fair, I was not going to win with my coding skills. Like, let's be very honest. We've all been coding for 3 months. We're not going to blow away a CTO because of, like, my create method. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so to me, I didn't focus on, look how great my code was. I focused on, look at my UI. I drew, like, the splash page myself. And look, like, I'm going to walk you through the product experience. And I'm going to walk you through how I thought about the different positions. And I'm going to tell you specifically about 3 problems I had building this app and how I went around it, right? So I'm not telling you about my code. I'm telling you about me as a person. And I'm telling you about my problem-solving strategies. And I'm telling you about how I think. Because that's the thing that makes me different. My code is not what makes me different. It's how I approach problems that makes me different. So when I pitched myself, and like I practiced this pitch, I put a lot of time into it. I made sure to emphasize the design part, which I knew no one else was going to do. Everyone else was using Bootstrap. I refused to use Bootstrap. Like, I hand coded all my CSS elements, and so that was like an instant differentiator. And I made sure to talk about the UX, which no one else I knew was going to do. And I made sure to talk about the problems I had and how I got through them. So knowing those points and being able to talk through those points, I think was absolutely crucial in that science fair and in every interview I've done since.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You may or may not know the answer to this, but what do you think about like a startup versus like you're a big company, 9 to 5?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many opinions on this. So you're right in that I don't actually know, but I know from asking many other people that question and getting very different answers. So I'm going to preface it by saying it completely depends on who the startup is and who the company is. And no 2 companies are the same, no 2 startups are the same. However, I think that when you're working at a startup, the goal of a startup is generally to find a revenue model as soon as possible. That's the goal. And I think the goal is to get the product out there as fast as you can, to make money as soon as you can, to not run out of investment, and to just get the job done. I think that in that environment, I think it's really hard to do those things, but also focus on good code quality. I think it's hard to put out, a product very quickly and make sure investors are happy, and also, learn how to be a better programmer. So that to me, and I know this from just like having worked at startups and knowing what that environment is like, but also just from what people have told me. And so for that reason, I was not excited about working at a startup. I didn't think that was a good place for me to learn and to grow. A big company kind of has the, I guess, opposite problem where, because actually, let me go back. So the benefit of a startup though is because you are going so fast, you have the opportunity to touch many different parts of the code. And you have the opportunity, if you get there early enough, to kind of start from the beginning, see where it goes, and you have to live with your legacy code, so there's some incentive to not make it too bad. So I think the downsides are just, rushing and not focusing on code quality, but the benefits are being able to touch so many different parts of your code. At a big company, because it's a really big company and you probably have a huge platform, I think your chance of touching different types of code or different parts of the code base are very limited. I think you're much more likely to be in a very specific part of it and to kind of deep dive into a topic, which can be good or bad, right? The good thing is if you're deep diving into one thing, then you can learn all the nuances and all the tools, and you can play around and get really specific with things. The downside is that you might get bored. Like, you might just not want to do that one thing, and you might want to try different things. The other thing about a startup is because it's a startup and you just don't have that many people, it might be hard to find that mentorship, that learning environment that you want. Whereas for a bigger company, you're more likely, I think, to get a mentor and someone who's going to invest more time in you. So those are kind of like very big assumptions and things that I've heard when I asked a lot of people that same question. But again, it depends very, very much on the culture. It depends very, very much on the people that you're working with. But those are definitely things to think about. Anything else?
Yeah, going back to the technical or the interviews that you had. Could you explain like how you kind of prepared for the technical part?
Yeah.
Or how that went?
Yeah. So let me see. Technical parts. So I'm going to give you some examples of technical questions and things I've been asked. So the very basic one you've all probably heard of is FizzBuzz. I was asked to code FizzBuzz in specifically JavaScript and Ruby. So they said code it in 2 different languages, and I picked JavaScript and Ruby. I've been asked to do, in 2 different interviews, I was asked to design a blog app in Rails. So the blog app had to have an author and, what kind of databases would I have, what kind of models, what kind of relationships would they have. They had to have a commenting system. There had to be a news feed. So kind of, and it was all whiteboarded, so I wasn't like coding anything, but it was more of a, how would you think through this problem? Those are my favorite ones. I really like those a lot. I've been asked to explain, so to answer the question, when I type in google.com, in my browser and I press enter, what happens? And I was expected to explain like on a very low level in terms of like packets and stuff, which I did not know the answer to, which is not good. You should know the answer to that. Go learn that. I've been asked, what else have I been asked? I've been asked the elevator problem, which I don't know if you've heard of, but apparently it's a pretty typical computer science question that says if you have an elevator and there are 10 flights and there's 3 of them, how would you program the elevator so that it's like the most efficient system that you can? That one, I was really proud of myself. I just kind of sat down. I knew it was coming, so I just kind of sat down and figured it out, and I didn't cheat. I didn't like read up about it or anything, and I was like pretty close to the answer, so I was happy about that. So I've had like a wide variety of technical questions. I prepare for them by doing different things. So there's a resource called Interview Cake, if you've heard of it, and they have a lot of good. Well, I don't know if they have a lot, but when I did this, I guess 2 years ago is when I used it. They only had like maybe 20 questions. I think their bank of questions has gotten bigger. But they have a lot of good technical questions. The thing is, all their answers, well, at least 2 years ago, all their answers were in Python. But if you know Ruby, then it's pretty close, so you can figure out what it's talking about. So I use that resource. I use Project Euler, if you haven't heard of that. So it's a bank of, it's like a database of many, maybe thousands, at least hundreds of mathy problems that can be solved in any language. So I've used that before. This is one thing I did that I was really happy that I did. I did a bunch of mock interviews. So I set them up, and I got, I think, 6 different people, and I said, hey, I know I'm going to be looking for a job in 6 months, and I want to practice, so could you just give me a mock interview and tell me how I did? I think I did about 6 of those, and they were very, very insightful. I learned a lot about what I knew and what I didn't know. I took that criticism, I refined myself, and did better. In those mock interviews, I had a mix of cultural fit questions, but also like technical questions, so it was really great. What else? I think I Googled, most common CSS questions when I was interviewing for a front-end position, most common Ruby questions, and kind of went through that list as much as I could. And there's lots of different resources on those. If you just do that Google search, you'll see them yourself. So yeah, a lot of that stuff. Another thing that you should do when you're preparing is to read the product blog of the company you're applying for, or the company you're applying to, because if they have a product blog, usually they'll talk about the latest tools they're using, they'll talk about their latest project, they'll talk about things that worked and that didn't work. So if you go there and read up on it, you'll get that's a really great thing to bring into the conversation. If you're able to say, hey, I noticed you were building this whatever tool and I actually played around with it and I had some ideas, I mean, you're winning at that point. So I've used like the product blogs as things to research and study so that I could prepare for interviews.
Yeah, I think a lot of those product blogs really are written with potential employees in mind of their audience.
Yeah.
It's catnip for you.
Yes.
If I could extend Garrett's question a little, did you notice when you interviewed, like, did certain companies have like different personalities in interview? Like, would some just be all technical questions? Were some pretty much no like brain teaser puzzle questions? Like, what sort of variations between companies did you notice, and how did you personally respond to those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's like two parts, right? The first part is just when you're interviewing, you get a sense for the company, you get a sense for the people, just personality-wise. Some I really liked, others I was like, no, not for me. In terms of the technical and interview questions, it says a lot, I think. So when I was asked the networking, packets, data, whatever question, but I wasn't also asked questions about product development and, how to model different systems, that to me was a red flag. That to me was okay, if this is the kind of thing you care about and you're not asking me, a build a blog app type of question, that tells me about the type of work I might do, and that is a concern. Other people, one of my favorite interviews that I had asked a little bit of everything. They asked a little bit of the, how to build a blog app type question, but they also asked, what is the MVC framework? Can you explain that concept? One of my favorite ones was tell me a pattern that you know, and when would you use it? And then it becomes a conversation, and becomes a conversation beyond, did you Google this answer and can you spit out the response to FizzBuzz? It becomes like almost an intellectual question and a conversation. And so to me, when a company asks technical questions that lend themselves more to conversations, that's a very good sign. And that makes me feel a lot more comfortable about the company. Did that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
What else you got? We talk about more job stuff. We can talk about speaking. We can talk about drawing.
I saw Donald. I saw your mic turn on for a sec.
I certainly have questions if no one else does.
Yeah, he's not gonna work, then I guess I kind of have a question. I live in Rochester. You know Rochester, upstate New York. So I live in Rochester, so my scene's not very big here. So what would you say is the best recommendation for me, for job searching? Should I do an intern, try to find something online remotely, intern thing, or should I just rush in and hop in and try to move to a bigger city?
Well, that's a good question. Oh man, that's something I think about because I'm right in New York City.
Yeah. Well, you said that one of the biggest things for you was being an internship, and you did junior, almost like a junior position. So you said that was a good route, so that's probably the best route, would you say, for me?
And versus remote pairing.
Those versus moving to a city and trying to find the job and hoping for the best kind of thing,
Yeah. That's a tough one. So I mean, the advantages to moving to a big city are that there are probably going to be more meetups, more speaker things, more conferences. There's just so much more, and that's the thing. I feel at least in New York City, there's a huge tech culture that's beyond just a job, right? There's an event. Jesus Christ, an event. There's so many events every single night. So many hackathons. If I get one more invitation to a hackathon, I swear to God. There's so much going on, and I think that if you're looking for a job, if you're a new developer, you're trying to establish yourself, all that stuff can be really, really great and really, really important. But having said that, I feel because the thing that you're doing is coding and all you need for that is a computer and an internet connection, I feel you should be able to do just fine remote as well. I think that if you are very aggressive about your online presence, if you're very, if you're very comfortable, and that's another thing too. I love working remotely. I do everything with Google Hangout. It's the best. And I'm very comfortable in that environment. And I know that a lot of people aren't. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't feel, the loneliness, doesn't feel the need to be around humans, I think you can get very, very far as a coder doing remote work, for sure. So I think it depends a lot on where you are, but I think you can get very far just doing remote stuff. I think there are lots of reasons to move to a city, and I would, and I don't know, like, if you're also excited to move into a city, but if you're not excited about the city life, I would explore doing remote stuff first and see how far you can get and how much, and how well it works out, before making like that big of a life decision.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, it's expensive to live in New York or San Francisco.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yep, second.
Yes, definitely.
Do you think that it's feasible, or do you think that there's a lot of companies that are cool with hiring a kind of a beginning programmer to work remotely if they're working 100% remotely?
That's a good question. I think that everyone is moving towards more remote work. I think it's easier, it's cheaper, it's faster. I think the fact that there's so many developers, there's such demand for developers means that they can't really be as picky, which is great if you want to work remote. However, I think the hard part about being a more junior developer and working remote is that you are competing, because most of the in-person boot camps are they're in bigger cities. You're competing with junior developers who are already there. So it's not so much about finding a developer job. I think it might be a little bit harder to find a remote junior developer job because there are already a lot of people who are junior developers looking for those same jobs in those cities because that's where the boot camps are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would also say that I kind of seconding that I actually don't really believe that a junior role is typically going to be the best learning experience that you can get remotely. Because it's very hard to replace the seamless interaction of sitting next to someone and asking them a question when you're learning. As part of that.
And I think that's also a big part about a big part of that is how the team communicates. So if your team is really, really big, on Slack, for example, and you always have your window open, then that makes it a lot easier. If you're in a very email-centric company, and a lot of bigger companies are still very email-centric, and there isn't kind of that open channel, that open window for communication for, just kind of going back and forth, then yeah, remote totally will not work. So I think that a lot of it also depends on the culture of the company. If you're able to work at a company that already does a lot of remote work, then I think your chances of being nurtured as a junior developer is much higher than if you're like the only person on the team working remotely. I think that would be not a good position to be in.
Donald, did you have a question?
Oh yeah, I was going to ask, you had said you were doing a conference at RailsConf and you had only really barely started learning coding. How did you go from just, not really having heard of RailsConf or not, hearing it at all, and then, a month into you learning how to code, you want to go and you're having a talk there at the conference? Like, just generally, how you went from A to B, really.
Yeah, sure. So I was definitely helped out. So we graduated from the boot camp in December, and then RailsConf applications, the CFPs, were due early February, mid-February. And so basically, Avi, the dean, sent out an email to everyone and said, hey, we should all submit talks to RailsConf. Let's have a brainstorming session on Saturday. And I was like, yeah! And so we went, and it was me and I think like 7 other people. I was so nervous, and I was dead quiet. I had no ideas. I didn't know what I was doing there. And I left, and I was like, oh, I have no idea. I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what would be interesting to other people. And then I ended up having coffee that day with a woman named Vanessa Hurst. I don't know if you guys know her, but she was one of the co-founders for Girl Develop It. Now she works on her own thing called Code Montage. And I told her, yeah, like the only idea I have is this reading code group that I've been doing with a couple of my friends, and it's been really interesting for me, and I've learned a lot, but I don't really know if anyone else would care to hear that story. And I told her, the story, and she was like, oh, no, this is really good. You should totally do this. And I was like, I don't know. And she said, no, really, you should do this. Fine. So I did. I submitted. I think I submitted it like with 10 minutes left to go in the, before CFPs closed. And I did not think in a million years that it would get picked. And then it did, and I was like, crap, now I have to actually write this talk, and I have to actually give this talk. So I think for me, it goes back to the whole, like, not waiting to be ready. I didn't submit that talk because I felt ready. I didn't submit that talk because I felt like I honestly had a chance. I submitted that talk because I knew that the act of submitting a talk was a hurdle I had to get over. And I knew that the sooner I could get over that hurdle, the sooner I would open myself up to many other opportunities. And like I actually wrote a blog post about how it felt submitting that talk, and I swear to God, that was like one of the most painful imposter syndrome moments I've ever experienced. I mean, I was like typing on my computer and like crying because I'm just freaking out about the idea that I would submit a talk. And my husband's like, "What are you crying about?" And I'm like, I haven't been coding for this long. I can't believe I'm doing this." And it was awful. It was awful. But then I did, and once I did, it was just this huge relief, and that was the win. Like the win was just pushing the submit button. Like guys, I was shaking, but then it went really well, and people really liked it. And I've given that talk I think like 10 times in the last year, like all around the world. So it's worked out really, really well. So don't wait till you're ready. You'll never feel ready, and it'll always be worth it if you just do it.
And again, the more you get yourself out there, the more you be loud, the better. The more people are going to see you and are going to sort of open up these new opportunities.
Yes, exactly. And the easier it'll be. It'll be much, much easier over time.
Yeah. So I think we have time for maybe like a couple more questions.
Yeah.
So what do you guys got? Also, again, if you're just watching externally, feel free to use the Q&A app or submit questions via Slack. Well, if not, I'll ask my questions.
Yeah.
So I was actually curious. I mean, we kind of stopped you partway through your narrative. And
I forgot where I stopped.
so you were working with the New York tech community, right? And so you're in this crazy experience, right? Where it's like you and one other person fighting for your lives to try and figure out how this technology comes together, how to collaborate, how to work. And then somewhere at the end of the tunnel, you leveled up into a consultant, right? And so I'm kind of curious what that transition was like, in terms of how did it come about, and then what was it like to actually make that transition into that work environment?
So from New York Tech Meetup to ThoughtBot?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I ended the Hacker in Residence program honestly feeling not very happy with myself. I felt like I said, I learned a lot, I grew a lot, but I didn't produce the type of work that I really wanted to produce. And I was just to me, it was a sign that I really needed to get back to a learning environment. And so I wanted to go to ThoughtBot as an apprentice because I wanted to just focus on my learning. Like that's
I guess we'll just have to wait till she comes back into connection.
Oh, it wasn't just me? Okay.
It wasn't just you. Yep, you're real. You're a real person. I'm a real person. So we just got to the good stuff. Well, I hope you guys are going to someone's going to think of one good last question. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Okay, we lost you for a minute. So.
Oh no! Was I just talking to myself the whole time? That's
a little bit.
Okay. Where did I end off?
We were talking to ourselves as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I did hear your question. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want me to answer? I see another question pop up. Do you plan to learn other languages like Java, C++? I think I missed it. Where'd it go?
I would love to actually connect and finish the narrative.
Sure.
We kind of got to. It's a totally different environment.
Okay, sure, no problem.
And so if you're able to close the narrative and then answer that question, then I think we can call it a night.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I guess I'll just start from the beginning because I guess you missed the whole thing. So I actually met ThoughtBot at our science fair at the Flatiron School. So the managing director, Trace Wax, the managing director of the New York City office was there, and we met. He actually gave me a T-shirt that was like a 3XL T-shirt that I now wear as my nightie. And we talked for a bit, and he said, you should consider applying to the apprenticeship. You know, we're not opening it up for another couple months, but you should apply. And then by the time that happened, I already had the hack and residence thing, so I ended up not applying. But I think a month or two later, the whole ThoughtBot team saw my talk at RailsConf, and that really, really helped. And then a couple months after that, I was a guest on the Ruby Rogues podcast, which is a weekly podcast on Ruby. And they invited me to become like a regular panelist. So now like the ThoughtBot team was listening to me every week, which definitely helped a lot. And then in that time, I was doing my own thing with CodeNewbie and the CodeNewbie Twitter chat, and I ended up doing my own podcast. I ended up speaking in a lot of different places in New York, and then, you know, later on I spoke at, you know, other countries, and that totally helped. And they're the kind of people who really care about that stuff. They really care about you being part of the community and you investing in the community. And so that just went a really long way. And that's the thing, right? Like when people, when you're loud and people see you, they're going to kind of keep track of you. And so I think it was maybe a year later when I finally actually had a real interview with ThoughtBot. And by that time, they already had like a really great impression of me because I've been around, like I've been in the community for that year. And so when we finally sat down, I did the interview and I did the technical interview. It was hard, but it was really good, and I had such a great, you know, vibe with them. They offered me the apprenticeship. But I think it was like they didn't have one immediately open, and they wanted to start me in January. So I actually took a couple months off and worked on CodeNewbie full time. And that to me was really great because I got to kind of work on a side project. I got to take all the things that I'd learned and was frustrated with and kind of brush up on certain things. To me, when I finished New York Tech Meetup, the biggest thing that I found out about myself was that I could get it to work, but I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to get it to work right, and I wanted to understand what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so for me, it was really important to go back to a learning environment. And so the apprenticeship offered me that learning environment, and that's why I decided to do that over other things. When I did the apprenticeship, that was hard. There was, oh my God, that was like one of the hardest things. And it was really hard because you get paired with a mentor each month, and you basically, you know, work with that mentor for most of the day, at least half the day. And it was just so clear how much better they were than me, and just how much work I had left to do. And it took a lot for me to feel confident in voicing my opinion on how to do certain things. I felt like I was always behind, but eventually I got better and I got faster, and I could see myself getting better and getting faster and picking things up more quickly. And I think that went a very long way with them. And so, yeah, that was really hard, but I think it was awesome. It was so great to not feel the pressure of having to push product, of not feeling the pressure of, we need to get this out the door now, and just saying, my job is to learn. You guys can worry about the product. I'm going to worry about, getting really, really good and asking all the questions that I can. And I actually walked around with a notebook, like a Moleskine notebook, and I would write down everything that everyone said all the time. And it was there that I learned Vim for the first time, which was awful and amazing at the same time. So it was a lot of learning in a very short amount of time, but it was totally worth it. And so that to me is kind of where I get the whole, I think apprenticeships and internships are really good. That's kind of where that comes from. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So, Olga, do you plan to learn other languages like Java, C++, etc.? What are your next steps to grow as a developer? I need to learn JavaScript really well. That's what I need to do. I feel like everyone needs to do that. I've heard so many Ruby developers say, man, I really need to get into just JavaScript thing. I don't want to, but I have to. So that to me is the next thing. So I am not one of those programmers. I think most programmers are like this, but I'm not one of those people who feels like I need to learn the latest and greatest framework and language. I think that's kind of good and bad, but I would much rather dive really, really deep into a programming language and get really comfortable and know all the ins and outs than to kind of, learn different things. I think a lot of developers, at least a lot of developers I know, are very excited about new languages and new tools and kind of want to try a bunch of stuff. I just don't have that desire. So for me, learning JavaScript is more because I know that that's an important language. There's so many frameworks that use JavaScript. every app uses JavaScript. So to me, it's much more of a practical reason to learn it. But the others, if there's a practical reason, I'm open to it. But I'm not like yeah. JavaScript is the short answer. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're kind of at the end here.
Cool.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, and feel free. Dan has my email, so feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions or just want to talk one-on-one. I always try to make time for people who are learning to code because I totally get it. It's hard, but it's totally worth it. So if you want to talk, you want advice, you have questions, I'm very, very accessible. So please feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Learn loud, hustle hard.
I like that. Learn loud.
Continue. So thank you, guys, and have a good night.
Alrighty. Take care, everybody.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
No
Bye.
problem. Bye.